I'm actually very surprised because up till last evening, I sent out these reminders and I'm like, please RSVP. And then as you guys are coming into the room, I'm like, whoa, whoa. Because half of you didn't, but I'm very happy that all of you are here. And we have some more chairs coming in. We have some more chairs coming into the room for those of you standing. My opening remarks might sound a little bit like a Sunday morning sermon, but that is what happens when you have important people in the room. So please forgive me. If you've attended church before this, I am sorry. And if you did not, well, indulge me. As we begin, I respectfully observe protocols. I wish to first acknowledge His Excellency Professor Compton Bourne, OE, Ambassador Extraordinaire, and Plenipotentiary of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana to Brazil, former Chancellor of the University of Guyana, esteemed economist and author of Building a Better Future, Memoirs of a Caribbean Economist. And he is the reason we're all in this room on this good Sunday morning. Sir Ronald Michael Sanders, KCMG, KCN, AM, Ambassador Extraordinaire and Plenipotentiary of Antigua and Barbuda to the United States of America and to the OAS, who yesterday received an honorary Doctor of Laws from the University of Guyana, and he delivered a highly regarded convocation address, which I reflected on through the evening and even this morning and had conversations with my colleagues about also. Members of the Diplomatic Corps, resident and visiting, hello. Professor Paloma Mohamed Martin, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Guyana. Former Ministers of Government and the wider Caribbean, including Mr. Carl B. Greenidge, former Minister of Foreign Affairs and former Minister of Finance of Guyana. Professor Winston Dookeran, former Minister of Finance and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Trinidad and Tobago. He's joining us online. Distinguished academics and regional leaders of higher education, including in absence and contributing to today's program, Professor Andrew Downes, former Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the UWI Cave Hill campus, and Dr. Shelton Nicholls, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, and former Senior Economist at the IMF. He is also joining us online. Mr. Walter Alexander, my favorite guy in the room. Distinguished Guyanese educator and proud member of UG's first graduating class. It's good to see you, sir. Always a pleasure. Representatives of the University of Guyana administration, faculty, staff, representatives of the University of Guyana, former administration, Professor Pro-Chancellor of the University of Guyana, former Pro-Chancellor of the University of Guyana, Major General retired Joe Singh. Good morning, sir. Former Vice-Chancellor acting, Dr. Crichton, and our beloved students, the heart of our university, thank you for being here on this good Sunday morning. Specially invited guests, colleagues, alumni, members of the media, and our online audience across the Caribbean and beyond, good morning again to you all. Ladies and gentlemen all, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this special gathering of the reflection, scholarship, and celebration. There we honor the life, work, and intellectual legacy of His Excellency Professor Compton Bourne, one of the Caribbean's most respected economists. Some people in the room do not believe. Thank you so very much. Sometimes the technology fails us, and that is what it is. The show will go on when we sort it out, and here the show will go on. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this special gathering of reflection, scholarship, and celebration. Today we honor the life, work, and intellectual legacy of His Excellency Professor Compton Bourne, one of the Caribbean's most respected economists, an institution builder, a visionary dedicated to the region's social and economic development. We are privileged to hear reflections from distinguished colleagues who have known and worked with him and are eager to speak of his remarkable contributions. If you think this is long and preachy, wait until the gentlemen who follow me. Come on. But before those gentlemen come, our distinguished Vice-Chancellor, Professor Paloma Mohamed, will bring opening remarks. Please welcome her.
Good morning, everyone. Notice she said the long and preachy will come from men, so I will not be one of those. But thank you so much, everyone, for being here this morning. I'd like to stand on the protocols that Joelle has established. She's gone through a very extensive list of the dignitaries, well-wishers, high officials in the room. I'd like to also add, we have a table of very young people, I think from UG's various clubs, and I'm always delighted to acknowledge them, so please give them a round of applause, because this kind of information is always carried forward by the next generation. And because it's Sunday morning, and if we know young people, we know that this is a major sacrifice for them to get out of bed at this hour. Most people. But it is indeed, I believe, a significant honor and something that is worthy of note that so many of you would have come out this morning on a Sunday morning in the rain and dealing with traffic issues on the roads to honor our former Chancellor and of course His Excellency, who's had a long and distinguished career, not only in education, but in diplomacy and in finance. So we're delighted to do this. Secondly, I'm not going to speak about the book because many other people on the program will speak about the book, and he also will speak about the book. But I want to just make some perfunctory remarks about the importance of having people write about their experiences, because the canon of Caribbean biography and autobiography is so tiny that many of us know of people, but we do not have an insight into how they thought about what they did, their experiences, and most of that is lost to the new generation and many of us in mid-career who really want to understand how they did what they did, who need to have insights into their legacy and also how the institutions that they served made decisions. And so this is a very, very, very welcome contribution. I don't believe there are more than 70 books in the entire Caribbean that have been written by persons who have served at this level. And so it is a most welcome contribution. We are privileged and honored to have His Excellency grace the university with his presence and also to allow us a small, modest, but very significant, I believe, opportunity to launch this book in Guyana. Thank you, sir. He's here for a very short period, and so is Sir Ronald. Sir Ronald, thank you for being here this morning. As Joelle said, there was a standing ovation yesterday for his acceptance speech at the graduation, and this was marvelous. We have it to circulate. He will have, and just let me do a shameless plug, we are hosting also on Tuesday a lecture by Sir Ronald, a very significant topic of international relations, law. And so while we have seats for 200 people, everybody else can join online. If you don't have an invitation, please get one from Joelle so you can come, because that will be a treat as well. So ladies and gentlemen, I did say I was not going to be long and preachy. Thank you for being here. Welcome. And Joelle, thank you so much for everything that you have done. She's been a chief cook and bottle washer, as they say, for pulling this together in our graduation week. And I'd like to thank her. I'm very proud of the fact that our young people are able to carry these things forward. And as she said, Mr. Alexander is her favorite man in the room. We'll have to fight over him. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor. And to begin our reflections on the life and work of Professor Compton Bourne, please welcome our former Minister of Foreign Affairs and former Minister of Finance, Mr. Carl B. Greenidge.
Thank you very much, Madam MC. Professor Bourne, Sir Ron Saunders, representatives of the Diplomatic Corps, Professor Mohamed, those who are with us online, including Professor Dookeran, Downes, Shelton, Nicholls, and others, please forgive me for not going through the entire list, but I just want to acknowledge, in keeping with protocol, the presence of those individuals. It is a great pleasure for me this morning to join you to share some thoughts on this masterpiece by Professor Compton Bourne. I'm not going to take responsibility for or acknowledge the sins of the males in the room. All I want to say is this. When I first looked at the book, I assumed that it was an autobiography in the normal sense of the term, meaning that it covers all aspects of one's life and the relationships that have been developed over the years in the course of that life. But in looking properly at the text and the title, I see that it is meant to be a memoir, okay? And I make that distinction because I went and had a look at the dictionary to determine what really was the difference. How wrong would I have gone if I had not paid attention to it? And a memoir, I understand, is a more narrow coverage of one's life and work. It may focus on a theme, it may focus on a period, and so forth. In the end, it really doesn't matter, you know, because I think what is important is what the author wants, the message that the author wants to convey to us. And in this piece by Professor Bourne, we have an extensive coverage of a range of things. And let me say very quickly, I agree with what was said before, that Caribbean and Guyanese achievers, super achievers even, I don't know whether it's less than 70, but they have and are often being accused of not writing, not sharing their experiences, not sharing their opinions. And therefore, this is a very welcome contribution. May I say at the same time that there is also growing internationally a field of study pertaining to autobiographies by economists, because it is recognized that in contributing to any field, one individual draws upon all sorts of things, interface with others, the development of their own thinking, only by having the opportunity to hear developments or changes have, how they evolve over the years, that one can fully understand where we've arrived at in terms of one person's contribution or one person's work. And in recent times, this complaint by the society, I think, has been addressed. There are a number of contributions, whether one calls them memoirs or biographies, from some of our most outstanding personalities in Guyana, particularly in the field of economics and finance, but also in other areas. Only within the last year, we've seen contributions from William Boyle, Professor Maurice Odell, Frank Douglas, but that is in the field of medical science. And basically, therefore, we will have an opportunity by these contributions to understand a little bit more about the evolution of thought, their own contributions and interface with the rest of the community. If I might say quickly now, if I might venture into general comments. This is a very long book. It is nearly 500 pages. It's not restricted to economic analysis, nor is it restricted to banking or university administration. And I can also say that Compton doesn't scrimp on his own thoughts about what is taking place around him. From the very first chapters, we get vignettes of social conditions, social changes, economic challenges, social upheaval. It starts off there in relation to Guyana. But if you follow the book, you will find that those reflections and thoughts are also shared in relation to not Trinidad and Tobago or simply Jamaica, where one would assume, and Barbados, since he spent most of his working life in those areas, but across the Caribbean. You can find observations on political, social developments, Dominica, Grenada. Some of those observations are, of course, touching on things that are quite controversial. And one of the characteristics of the book, one of the main features, is the ability of Compton. I've noticed this with him over the years. I've known him perhaps not as long as a lot of the people I've seen around here, for certain. But he has not only a capacity to tell a story or to relate to an event that arises, but to recall all sorts of details, put all kinds of details together. I don't know whether that's the benefit of having worked in a factory. He was explaining that he was so bored that he used the opportunity to develop his memory and think of who this, but I have been struck by the astonishing number of persons that he has been able to. He is, of course, a major networker, but I've been struck by the number of persons whose names appear here, and for whom, as he goes on, he can provide something of a background and insight into their contribution in the context of whatever it is he is discussing. The last person I spoke to a minute or two ago was one such person. I first met him in 1974 when I arrived in Guyana. And I have seen him maybe 3 or 4 times subsequently. So I was absolutely amazed to find his name appearing, as indeed others who, with whom I've shared similar limited experiences, or intense and then limited experiences. And those names run from Bernard Cord to, well, I don't know. I don't know that I want to go through them. Sometimes this can be a problem in the presentation because it can detract from the substance. But it is a major contribution to walking down memory lane, as it were. So many people, so many little bits of information on what they've done since, their contributions in different fields, contributions in areas. And I'm saying this because it's not only about people in the university. In this presentation also, one of the things that struck me is the extent to which Compton is anchored in his family, nuclear and extended family. And he goes to great pains, with possibly the only exception of his father, to ensure that we are aware that that is an important side of his life. So he's put out a tremendous amount of academic work, and at the same time, he tries to ensure, as many of us do and fail miserably, to ensure that his family, the children, are taken to things that they may find interesting or the parents would find interesting, and to ensure that they are perhaps benefiting from the things that he benefited or from which he was unable to benefit as a child and subsequently. I think one of the other aspects that is interesting in this work is the opportunity that he has taken to tell us a little bit about the mechanics and the goings on behind the scenes. I was impressed and pleased to see the favorable comments made about University of Guyana, for example. Of course, he's talking about the UG in the 70s, as compared to Mona and St. Augustine. But one of the important things that comes out of this also, and I say this because with university administrators around, whether it's at the level of the departments or the VC, it is important to understand that the facilities for exchanging academic and other ideas does not always only depend on the books. The physical setting for the social interchange is very, very important. I myself had noticed this, never having spent much but passing time at UE, the role that the senior common rooms and the related physical areas play in the exchange of ideas, not in a department of economics. And Compton says this very, very, I think, clearly, but across the spectrum of thought, whether it is in social sciences, medicine, or what else. The physical arrangements for persons to be able to exchange ideas, challenge each other's thoughts, and so forth, is very, very important. And I'm going to finish there because I am very much conscious of the time constraints. When I heard initially Compton say to me, 7 minutes, but don't be too restricted by the 7 minutes. I already nearly got heart failure because my my own practice in these things is to write notes. You say, yes, it's too long, but I will cut it down. And then when you stand, you find that it's been enhanced 2 or 3 times or 2 or 3-fold. So I will not subject you to that abuse this morning. Let me just say that we have, if I might close here, we have been presented with, I said it's very long, I don't want to emphasize that, but it is a major contribution to our thought. There are many focuses. The challenges of central banking, for example, are there. The difficulties that you face in taking on these institutions, one of the things he did was to draw a contrast between the CDB under Willie Demas. I had the privilege of working with Demas, and the CDB subsequently, including with other distinguished presidents. Compton has an advantage, I think, compared with many of them. I don't want to be invidious about this, that the very networking that I made reference to the host of names he can remember, the things he can recall, the people with whom he relates, that was clearly a major advantage in his case, because he was able, notwithstanding the stature of Willie Demas to start, he was able to use his own strengths to ensure that the work of the bank, which he sets out very clearly, the major challenges were both understood by himself and those that were partners who were supposed to assist him, the financing partners, the non-regional members, as well as those who are representing the various constituencies, such as, and he points this out, the effort he made, for example, to work with the members, the directors, or Barbados' directors on the bank. These are all dimensions of the need to manage one's social relationships with the institutions and the people manning the institutions that one works with. That's a dimension of the contribution that you will find in here that's very valuable. Often, let me say, in the Caribbean, this is where we fail. It is often where we fail. These institutions break down frequently simply because not enough is done by way of interfacing, ensuring clarity of understanding of issues and of options for resolving the problems that might arise. I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea. Normally a review would require that one summarizes, tells you what the chapters have and so forth. I don't think that the time arrangements allow that. But if you look at the preface, you will find that a clear summary is also provided very early of what the book sets out to do and what the various chapters provide. Madam, thank you very much for your tolerance. I hope that I haven't tried your patience too much.
Thank you, former Minister Greenidge. In terms of family and Professor's social skills, very refined social skills, I've gotten to chapter 1, and it's a beautiful start. I'm at page 15 at chapter 1. And I think by the time you get to page 15, you'll understand how Professor is able to integrate family with work, because he's been doing it as a child. As a child. Thank you again, former Minister Greenidge. And now I welcome Professor Winston Dookeran, Professor of Practice, Diplomatic Academy, UWI, St. Augustine Campus, former Minister of Finance and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Trinidad and Tobago, who is joining us online.
Hi, good morning. Am I on? Hello, good morning. Am I on? Yes?
Professor, you're on.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here in the midst of some of my old friends and new relationships. I felt very honored when Compton Bourne asked me to say a few words on this very important occasion for us here as well as throughout the Caribbean. Dr. Compton's Bourne story is our story. It's a Caribbean story. It's a story that captures our global identity, explores our challenges, drills down to the mechanics of change for a better future. It is not only a personal reflection, it is indeed a comprehensive account of Caribbean economic scholarship and practice. It is done with clarity and precision. It portrays the life of a dedicated teacher, an insightful policy designer, a builder of institutions whose work laid the foundation of modern Caribbean economic development. The depth of research and careful attention to details, and his commitment to his colleagues, as reflected by Carl earlier, reveal both his intellectual discipline and his personal humility. Our professional paths crossed on several occasions, firstly at the University of the West Indies, then at the Central Bank, and later at the Caribbean Development Bank. But what I remember most is the quiet conversations in the corridors of the Arts Building at St. Augustine, where Compton first introduced me to Caribbean economics when I first joined the faculty there. His thoughtful, informal conversations were moments that required a reflection on his essence as a teacher. Very clear, very patient, and very practical. In my view, Compton Bourne embodied the best qualities of three remarkable Caribbean figures: the analytical discipline of William Dumas, the policy focus of Alistair McIntyre, and the political sagacity of P.J. Patterson. His unique contribution lay in combining these traits: rigorous analysis, strategic vision, and political insight. His memoirs unite these dimensions in what I describe as a structural dissertation of Caribbean development. I will make a few brief remarks on his chapter 9 dealing with Caribbean integration, which has been one of his central themes. He stands among the leading architects of a regional economic thought and a trusted, but if often candid, advisor to Caribbean leaders. He moved seamlessly from designing long-term strategies for development to providing incisive advice in times of crisis, always guided by data, by evidence, and a deep belief in the power of regional cooperation. In that chapter, he was clear: integration requires a plan, It requires honest diagnosis. It requires a clear understanding of an implementation gap. It must embrace sector-specific solutions, and it must be built in a framework in which economic pragmatism is upheld. In so doing, Professor Bourne also dealt in his work on the diplomacy of our times, the current geopolitical moment, marked by global unpredictability and shifting regional dynamics, provides a setting in which the principles of economic diplomacy, which he promoted, are now central to how the Caribbean must position itself in the world. I believe it was Sir Hilary Beckles in a conference here in Port of Spain entitled The Future of the Caribbean, who called for the rekindling of the Caribbean Revolution, saying that the Caribbean is at the crossroads and a cradle of the modern world, which he described as the first true global village. It is in that context that Compton Bourne asked and answered the question, how will Caribbean economies adapt to these global shifts in power? How in this first true global village will diplomatic and economic leverage can be used to shape the evolving global order? Implied in his writings were the fact that the older models of integration no longer suffice. The structures are limited, the tools outdated, and the outcomes inconsistent. A new regionalism must emerge, one that connects production across borders, enables free financial movements, and build resilience in critical sectors as energy, food, and trade. In advancing this work on diplomacy, there is no doubt that the current situation with the geopolitical setting has been anticipated somewhat. For reading through the lines, it is very clear that Professor Bourne had understood that we are entering into a truly multipolar world. I asked myself, or is it a world without a clear center of power, or no power world? I look forward to reading what Ron Saunders had to say yesterday, from what I've heard here today. This question is often forged and fudged as countries hedge, not knowing where and how to turn in this time of erratic conduct of international relations. It is therefore to tribute to the work of Compton Bourne that he has adopted a number of strategic interventions which must be done in order to be able to provide the Caribbean with the confidence to navigate in the geopolitical settings of our times. He talked about building a resilient techno-diplomacy framework, focusing on a new problem-solving diplomatic strategies in complex conflicts. I need not say more. He talks about diversifying regional supply chains, strengthening leverage, and being resilient markets in all markets and in power blocks. There is no doubt that we both agree that the world is entering an era of multipolar complexity. Some refer to it as multipolar chaos. a dynamic environment where technological, geopolitical, and ideological focus converge. It is to his credit, based on what he has written, that we must be inspired to act as a Caribbean with foresight, unity, and with strategic insight. It is therefore in that context that I see Compton Bourne's legacy extending far beyond the pages of this memoir. Not only does it live in the continuing pursuit of Caribbean development and integration, but it is a genuine progress, both of intellectual courage and political action. In an unpredictable and rapidly changing world, his example stands as a model of disciplined thought, rational commitment, and confidence in the Caribbean's capacity to build a better future. Always forward-looking, Professor Bourne maintained a keen awareness of the emerging global trends. It is therefore fitting for me to highlight two areas of inquiry that extend naturally from his work and invite deeper exploration by today's and tomorrow's researchers. The first concerns the ongoing debate on de-dollarization, a topic that is gaining prominence in the economic literature. Given Professor Bourne's extensive writings on financing for development, the evolving issue offers an important continuation of the analytical legacy that he has provided for policy innovation in the Caribbean. The second area involves governance in regional integration models worldwide, for his work has not only been here, but has also touched on countries in Africa and in the Philippines. Professor Bourne's insight into governance structures and his work in higher education offers valuable perspectives for rethinking institutional frameworks and designing new governance models, particularly in integration movements. Together, as we look ahead, these themes of de-dollarization and governance and integration models may be a logical extension of the rich scholarship legacy of Professor Compton Bourne's monumental publication, Memoirs of a Caribbean Economist, Building for a Better Future. It is with these remarks that I welcome this opportunity. And I say, for these reasons and for many more, we all today have gathered here to pay tribute to a friend and a colleague, an outstanding person, Compton, and I join with you in celebrating this and his continuing sterling contribution, for which we are yet to see some more development to our Caribbean society. I say thank you so much for asking me to be here and for joining with all of you in the University of Guyana on this very momentous occasion in the name of our eminent friend and scholar, Professor Compton Bourne. Thank you.
Sir Dookeran, thank you. So our next speaker, we cannot, whatever the length of this commentary, the young lady reading it is not in any way responsible. Please welcome to the podium Miss Monisha Persaud, President of the UG Economic Society, who is going to read the remarks of Professor Downes, former Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the UWI Cave Hill campus. Welcome, Monisha, please.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. So I will be reading on behalf of Mr. Downes. Good morning, distinguished guests. His Excellency Ambassador Professor Compton Bourne. Let me apologize for not being able to attend the launch of Compton's book in person due to a change in the timing of the function. I would, however, like to thank Ms. Monisha Persaud for agreeing to present my brief comments on the book at the function. The publication of Building a Better Future, Memoirs of a Caribbean Economist by Compton Bourne is the latest in a series of biographies and autobiographies of distinguished Caribbean economists. Previous publications have been on W. Arthur Lewis, Alistair McIntyre, Maurice Odell, and Ida Greaves. This autobiography is a rich blend of Compton's personal life history and reflections on various aspects of the economic development of the Caribbean region. The text traces Compton's early life in British Guyana, now Guyana, his university education in the United Kingdom, his association with two leading universities in the region, the University of Guyana and the University of the West Indies, his critical role in the financing Caribbean development as president of the Caribbean Development Bank, CDB, and his involvement in building Caribbean regional economic integration. He points to the challenges of building a better future for the Caribbean region from his direct involvement in policy formulation and implementation and economic development research. His story begins with his enjoyment of childhood activities in both rural and urban Guyana, and the pleasures and dangers of exploring the land of many rivers, and the supportive environment of a large family network. We read about his religious beliefs, which changed over the years, and his passion for cricket, football, reading, and music. His exposure to economics, history, and British Constitution at advanced level probably ignited the light to study economics in the UK to the postgraduate level. His early entry into the Guyanese labor market certainly suggested that there were higher rates of return to university education. Although I know that Compton was not deep into active electoral politics, there is an interesting presentation of his awareness of political happenings and thinking in colonial Guyana, the wider Caribbean, and Africa. This awareness might have prepared him to understand the interaction of politics and economics, that is, political economy, and the Caribbean later in life. Over time, he strengthened his understanding of the social and economic condition of the working class and the need to help develop programs to reduce inequity and poverty in Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean. His exposure to the UK higher education system in the 1960s is instructive. Like many bright students from the Caribbean at the time, he struggled with funding his studies, finding comfortable accommodation, and grappling with some of the highly technical statistical aspects of economics. But he persevered, and with the love and support from his wife and family, he conquered in the end. Interestingly enough, we were taught graduate economics by the same person a decade apart. Professor David Shepard taught him monetary economics in 1967 to 1968 at Birmingham University, and me, macroeconomics, in 1977 to 1978 at the UWI. A significant part of the book, pages 67 to 326, documents Compton's association with UG and UWI. At UG, we read about his research in agricultural economics and financing, banking and credit and migration. His radical leaning in the Ratoon Group and the way forward for Guyana as a cooperative republic while he was a lecturer in economics, 1969 to 1971. His return to UG in 2009 as Vice-Chancellor saw a mature and experienced Compton who had to deal with the interplay of university and national politics and resource constraints. A challenging task indeed, but he was able to leave a positive mark on the university at the end of his tenure in 2012 via the range of projects he was able to complete. Compton blossomed during his attachment to the UE from 1971 to 2001. He completed his PhD in economics, moved from lecturer in economics at the Mona campus to professor of economics at the St. Augustine campus, taught and supervised a number of graduate students who have occupied significant positions in the regional institutions, established a specialty in monetary economics, and coordinated a program in the area. Moved into university administration as deputy principal of St. Augustine campus and pro-vice chancellor for planning and development. The chapters provide a rich history of his research findings in monetary economics, banking and finance, agricultural economics, labor economics, and Caribbean public policy, and the development of various networks involving contacts across the region. We also get a flavor of his social life in Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago, and intrigues of campus life and politics. The reader would also get an economist's feel for social and economic life in both countries and the attempt at building a better future for the people of the region. Compton's expertise was so well established that he was able to assist several countries in Africa as an economic consultant through various development agencies. As a university administrator, he was charged with expanding access to higher education and the region and financing the operations of the campuses. A close reading of the text would indicate that he did an admirable job and was later enticed to leave the UE to head the CDB in 2001. His experience at the CDB as president brought him face to face with the direct finance of the region's development thrust, as leaders sought to build a better future for the people of the region. He was immersed in the formulation of the development policies to promote economic integration in the region, interaction with international development partners to access finance for development, the shaping of the global agenda for the development of small development states, and the course of keeping the CDB as a viable and efficient institution along with other institutions in the region. As an octogenarian, he is still very much in the Caribbean development vineyard, as now he seeks to enhance the relationship between Brazil and Guyana for the benefit of the wider region. The final chapter in the book summarizes the economic and financial challenges facing the region and the university system with suggested approaches to these challenges leaders should consider. In his current position, I am sure that Compton would explore the use of economic diplomacy in seeking to resolve the problems facing Guyana and the rest of the Caribbean. Although it would have made the book a couple of pages longer, I would have liked to see a bibliography of Compton's research work so that the young researchers and others can build on his rich research output. Indeed, a second publication relating a collection of his papers might be in the offering. Compton has written a splendid reflection of his life experiences, personal and professional. I was truly amazed by his recall of names, places, and dates. It covers his adult life as a youthful radical in Guyana to a highly respected leader and diplomat in later life. This chapter on being a diplomat is still to be written. For young students of economics, the text is a treasure trove of information on the Caribbean economic thought, the financing of development, human capital development, especially higher order frontier skill development, agricultural development, and finance, the challenge of integration as a development strategy, development management and leadership, institutional development, the importance of networking, and the need to formulate evidence-based policy and programs. For the general reader, there are stories of perseverance, devotion, and love, dealing with adversity, building a network of friends and family, being humble and sociable, seeking knowledge on the diversity of human and natural life, and ways on helping persons live a better life. Whilst the 460 pages might appear daunting to a lot of persons, especially the young, among who like short, snapping publications, Compton's writing style makes the book very engaging, smooth, and jargon-free reading. The topics and presentations are readily understandable to an educated public. University managers would also find the discussion on financing, human resource development, and institutional planning and performance very instructive. There is no doubt that Compton towers over others in terms of his understanding of the challenges of development of the Caribbean region and the remedies needed. This has been developed from his research work in economics, his involvement in leading the charge in various institutions, and his network of associates in various institutions and countries. I would like to congratulate Compton on offering reflections of his life and its interface with the economic development of the region. I am very sure that he would have received strong support from his devoted wife, Pamela, and other family members and friends. He and Pam would have traveled the journey together since 1965, so the book indirectly reflects the building of a strong and enduring personal relationship built to last, as much as a commentary on building a better economic future for the region. The book is highly recommended to economists, young and old, students, and the general public. I certainly enjoyed reading the book as I learned new things about Compton, even though we have known each other for the past 4.5 decades. The book is certainly a significant addition to literature on Caribbean economic thought, history, and policy. Congrats once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Monisha, President of the UG Economic Society, and one of our students. She is the future. Future, we're speaking to the now, the yesterday and the now. She's the future. Online, we would like to welcome remarks from Dr. Shelton Nicholls, former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, and former senior economist of the International Monetary Fund. Please welcome him.
Good morning, and can everyone hear me clearly? Can you hear me clearly?
Dr. Nicholls, clearly.
Yes, okay, thank you. So all protocols involved, and of course, when I started reading these memoirs, I initially wrote about a full detailed sort of 20-page commentary on the book, but I'm going to deliver just a small portion of that today. So it is to me both a pleasure and a profound honor to offer these reflections on the remarkable contribution of His Excellency Professor Compton Bourne, one of the Caribbean's most distinguished economists, educators, and policymakers. For more than 5 decades, his influence has been felt across a wide constellation of institutions: the University of Guyana, University of the West Indies, both the Moon and St. Augustine campuses, the Regional Program of Monetary Studies, where he played a really central role, various national boards and committees, including, of course, the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, as mentioned already by Professor Winston Dookeran, and, of course, the Caribbean Development Bank, where he served with distinction as president. Even today, he continues to serve the region in a different but no less important capacity as Guyana's ambassador to Brazil. Prof, as generations of his students affectionately called him, I think belongs to that rare Caribbean pantheon of scholars, statesmen, policymakers, alongside such giants as Sir Arthur Lewis, Sir Sridhar Ramphal, and Sir Alistair MacIntyre, men who labored tirelessly in the vineyard of Caribbean development. In this tradition, Professor Bourne has played a defining role in shaping the modern Caribbean economic and intellectual landscape through his scholarly work, his administrative acumen, and his unwavering regional commitment. His memoirs, Building a Better Future, capture not merely the arc of a distinguished life, but the aspirations he awakened in so many of us who had the privilege to study under him, collaborate with him, or witness his quiet insistence on excellence. I think when read alongside the autobiographies of Sir Sridhar Ramphal, that is glimpses of a global life, and of course, Alistair MacIntyre's The Caribbean and the Wider World, Bourne's narrative captures the unfolding story of Caribbean integration and development, with its achievements and of course its disappointments. I think what distinguishes his account is the deliberate way he interweaves the evolution of his personal journey with the region's own development trajectory. And in so doing, he illuminates the tension between ideas and institutions, the friction between policy vision and political reality, and the persistent struggle of Caribbean societies to navigate the shifting tides of national, regional, and global politics. This has, of course, been mentioned before by Professor Dookeran and, of course, Mr. Greenidge in his remarks. The chapters, of course, the book is long, as mentioned before. It's about a 500-page memoir. And like Professor Downs, it's a point we didn't discuss, but I wrote. I think a complete bibliography of his academic and policy writings would have been a fitting capstone to this work, because it's wanting to read all of that, but to see the body of the work, I think, is also important. And that is perhaps left to the next generation of Caribbean scholars, charged, of course, with evaluating his contribution to regional scholarship and praxis. And this is something I myself, I have a list of perhaps all his publications, so this is not something easy or difficult to put together. I think one of the quiet pleasures of retirement that I've come to cherish is the unhurried freedom to read, reflect, and re-engage with the evolving story of Caribbean development. And I found myself returning to works that illuminate the region's struggles, its achievements and aspirations. And among them, I think Professor Bourne's memoirs stand out as an especially enriching and comprehensive contribution. Though formally organized into 10 chapters, it lends itself naturally to 3 thematic movements. His early years, that is the foundations of leadership, I would call that. His role as an educator and his academic life, informing him as a Caribbean economist. And finally, his policy leadership and in Caribbean development, which really encapsulates his stewardship in the vineyard for a better future. And of course, I suspect that my invitation today reflects not only the privilege of having studied under his exacting academic tutelage, I'll talk a little bit about that, but also the many years in which I worked alongside him as research collaborator, colleague, and fellow economic policy maker. These interactions offered me a front row seat through his methodological discipline, his clarity of thought, and his unwavering dedication to excellence and to the Caribbean project. And therefore, I just want to share with you, some anecdotes and, my own thinking on those three areas. So in the first area, his early years, in revisiting the opening chapters of his memoir, I was particularly drawn to the formative experiences that shaped his worldview and leadership ethos. These chapters are not just biographical details, but they really reveal the essential building blocks of character, of discipline, of curiosity, of resilience, of empathy, and of good judgment. And there are interesting anecdotes here. He grew up in the embrace of a large, close-knit working-class family in Georgetown. His mother's gift for narrative cultivated his sensitivity to people and culture. His father's seafaring life opened imaginative windows to the wider world, right? Another big anecdote is that responsibility came early. By age 10, he was negotiating prices in border and the Starbuck markets, reallocating scarce funds on the fly, and managing his grandfather's, friendly society dues, right? And of course, there's also the humanizing elements, the empathy that developed while ghostwriting love letters. I found this to be a really interesting part of the reading. Ghostwriting love letters to an illiterate friend, the camaraderie of sport, and the intellectual independence that shone through his challenges with school authorities over Latin, an early assertion of autonomy that he eventually transcended through mastery. So in this first part, his childhood reads as a crucible in which the future economist and Caribbean statesman was forged, a young boy absorbing the complexity, humor, hardship, and creativity of Caribbean life. The second movement in the memoirs, I think, is his life as an educator. And my own encounter with him began in 1984, in the final year of my undergraduate studies at the University of West Indies, St. Augustine, along with a small group of determined and dedicated classmates, Rupert Maid Singh, Terence Clark, Anand Das, Garnet Samuel, Nigel Batiste, other people. And we enrolled in this very demanding, and I say very demanding, and superbly structured course in monetary economics. From the very first lecture, it was clear that we were not simply learning a subject, we were being initiated into a discipline. And he approached monetary theory with analytical rigor and a distinctly quantitative orientation that was always grounded in empirical reality. So that, of course, ties right back to some of the previous comments we have heard. His lectures stood out for their clarity. They were precisely argued, sequenced logically, and quite comprehensive. And beyond the rigors of the classroom, he also cultivated a remarkable sense of collegiality. His gracious tradition of taking his class to lunch at the senior common room after his final lecture each year remains one of our fondest memories. And among our friends, we talk about that all the time, and reflected his respect for students and his belief in nurturing a scholarly community. I myself remember a lot of the early lectures, the work of Goldsmith and Gurley and McKinnon that he so liked. And of course, at the graduate level, we went exposed to the full spectrum of classical Keynesian monetary structuralist and post-Keynesian thought. We debated Lance Taylor's structuralist macroeconomics, Donald Harris's work on capital accumulation, and of course, we also looked at the heated debates between Bourne and Wendell McLean and other scholars that really shaped that early Caribbean monetary economic discourse, right? And Prof maintained an extraordinary personal library, and he opened it to all his students without hesitation. And having that kind of access was a gift to many of us because it helped shape our intellectual journey in ways in which we still appreciate today. For me, two of the big works that really stand out in his contribution is that 1989 monograph he produced on Caribbean development to the year 2000, one of the earliest comprehensive forward-looking development analyses that was prepared for regional heads of government. its analysis of global macroeconomic developments alongside the Caribbean structural vulnerabilities, the issues of the savings, investment, and foreign exchange gaps, etc., still resonate today. And of course, the second major work is that follow-up volume on financing development in the Commonwealth Caribbean, co-edited with Delil Warrell and Dinesh Doddia, which underscored the imperative for stronger financial sector supervision and more effective systems of financial innovation and management. And these issues are really essential to addressing the region's chronic savings deficit and structurally fragile financial systems. Another dimension of this intellectual work I'll just mention, and he treats it with much nuance in the memoir, is his engagement in the Regional Economic Partnership Agreement and the post-Lomé negotiations. Working alongside him, the late Tyrone Ferguson, Arnold McIntyre, Patrick Entwine, under the leadership of Sir Ramphal and Sir McIntyre, offered me an early window into Prof's intellectual precision and his finely tuned sense of political economy. And for Bourne, these negotiations were far more than technical exercises. They represented pivotal moments in which a vulnerable region was forced to re-examine its development model and strategically reposition itself within the very complex and rapidly evolving global trading system. And the final area is his policy leadership. And given his deep grounding in Caribbean realities, honed through a scholarship, field research, and regional engagement, it seemed almost inevitably that Professor Bourne would eventually pivot more directly into the policy arena. And his presidency of the Caribbean Development Bank was therefore less a departure for many of us from academia, but more a continuation of his life's work, now expressed through regional institutional building. And in this incarnation, he played a pivotal role in strengthening the bank's analytical foundation, deepened its operational capabilities, and really repositioned it within the international development community. He laid forged strong partnerships with the World Bank, with the IDB, with the EIB, allowing for a natural expansion of the financing portfolio of the bank and enhancing its capacity to meet the needs of its borrowing member states. So from these three movements in his life, the policy architect and the scholar became one. His analytical instinct guided his administrative decisions, and his administrative insights continued to refine his intellectual vision. So let me just conclude. The longer piece of this I will send on. Hopefully, this is something that I think should be published along with the other statements made by other persons. But his biography represents, or autobiography, I should say, far more than the chronicle of a distinguished career. It is fundamentally a meditation on what it means to build a purposeful life in the Caribbean. It portrays the child shaped by responsibility and community, the young man forged by danger, creativity, and self-discovery, the scholar disciplined by intellectual rigor, the institutional architect navigating Caribbean complexity, and the regional statesman who brought analytical clarity to some of the region's most pressing challenges. For those of us who studied under him, collaborated with him, or were shaped by his reasoning, the memoirs are a reminder of what it takes to build institutions and advance development in small states. Integrity, discipline, independence of mind, humor, and of course, a very deep regional commitment. I also had the privilege of house sitting for him for several weeks during my graduate student years while he traveled abroad with his family. I was genuinely surprised that he would entrust his home to a graduate student, and I was deeply struck by the confidence, trust, and generosity that was embodied in this simple gesture. So above all, the memoirs affirm that Caribbean development advances not only through grand visions or political declarations, but through the steady, thoughtful labor of enlightened leaders like Professor Bourne, who build institutions, shape ideas, mentor generations, and remain unwavering in their belief in the region's potential. His life stands as a testament to that quiet, steadfast labor, much like the patient cultivation of a vineyard that in time produces a refined and enduring wine. It affirms the promise of a Caribbean future shaped by disciplined minds and unwavering hearts. And I wholeheartedly commend this book to every policymaker committed to advancing the development of our region. It is not merely a memoir, but a reservoir of insight, rich in lived experience, disciplined analysis, and of course, hard-earned wisdom. Those who engage seriously with its lessons will find themselves better equipped to navigate the complexities of Caribbean development and to shape policies worthy of the future that our people deserve. And I'll stop there and thank you.
Dr. Nicholls, for your reflections on the life and work of Professor Bourne. Mr. Alexander, I trust you. Of all the speakers on this list, you are the one I trust to stick to the time. I'd like to welcome Mr. Walter Alexander. Program has former educator, but there's no such thing as a former educator. An educator and member of the University of Guyana's first graduating class. Please welcome this warm, wonderful gentleman, Mr. Walter Alexander.
Good everyone. All protocols observed. It will take too much time if I go through that long list. Firstly, I wish to thank you all for being here. And I wish to thank the Mistress of Ceremonies for the very information she has given introducing me. Just one little correction, please. Not of the first graduating class, of the first class of students at UG. I was there when UG first started classes, Wednesday, the 2nd of October, 1963. I was in the first batch. And I didn't graduate in the first class because in those days, it wasn't clear what you're going to major in. And I had to decide after some time what I was going to major in. And for your information, I majored in Spanish and minor in maths. Correct, that's right. I also wish to add that I'm most pleased to be associated with this book launch for a number of reasons. When Professor Bourne invited me to speak here today, he reminded me that I was his teacher in high school. I know you will start calculating ages and making comparisons between teacher and student. But Professor Bourne and I go back very many years, 70 years. Yes, I taught him, and my first year of employment, 1958, when I had written the Cambridge School Certificate Examination at the school both Compton and I attended, the now defunct British Guyana Education Trust. Yes, that's a secondary school which in the 1980s in this country had 6 former students serving as permanent secretaries in the public service of Guyana. And Professor Bourne insisted that I must come here this morning at the launching of his book and say something. But I really have something to say. I am immensely delighted that this book has been published for 3 special reasons, which are not necessarily personal, or selfish. Firstly, the author has informed me, mind you, I have not yet read the book. He informed me that the book does deal with Montmartre experience. That is the school with which he and I were involved, and where I was the headmaster for about 10 years. Montmartre began as a study group of young men in the late 1950s, when we were studying privately for the GCE, General Certificate of Education, examination at the ordinary level and at the advanced level. Later, in 1960, it became a school on Robb Street. Then it was moved to South Road border. Then it went to Durban Street. And when government took over schools in 1976, it became a government school, but it was decanted because of its size, relatively small, into the Charleston Secondary School. But what is of greater significance of that small school is the quality of students it produced, who in adult life were a minister of government, an assistant commissioner of police, a permanent secretary, a harbor master, a city engineer, and the list goes on. Nowadays, such small schools do not get that kind of results. And Compton Bourne's book tells the story about that school. Mind you, I have not read the book as yet. The second reason why I am pleased that this book has been written, and by one of the Caribbean eminent personalities, is that it adds to the stock of literature available to literate persons in the Caribbean. It helps to justify the need for the continued existence of bookstores in at least Guyana. In any civilized society, persons must write for others to read, and read not only on cell phones. I'm still amazed that in New York, the Barnes & Noble bookstore still attracts scores of customers, including students at all levels. The same is true of the Foyles bookstore in London, England. But in Guyana, at least our bookstores today are not so popular. When the Montmartre young men, and today I think there are about 3 or 4 of us in this gathering, when the young men were engaged in private studies in the 1950s, they were in the habit of regularly purchasing books to read. And lest we forget, the 1950s was the time of the paperback revolution, and books were relatively cheap, not as expensive as the hardcover editions, and many of us bought books and had our own private libraries. There are endless debates today about the quality of CXC results in English A and English B. But we are not reading, and we're not reading good writings. I trust that students and their teachers will find time to read these memoirs. The third reason why I'm delighted to be here this morning and that this book is out is that its publication will help me to overcome my own complaint of writer's block. Because I've been attempting to write my memoirs in the field of education. Compton has told me repeatedly, Xander, you must write. You must have a story to tell about education. I certainly do. I've been collecting tons of papers on my experiences in education all over this country. These memoirs of a Caribbean economist will certainly give me the urge to go on writing about education in Guyana. Once again, heartiest congratulations to Professor Bourne and best wishes for monumental sales of this volume. Thank you very much.
A man of principle. I think that was about 7 minutes. Professor. It is my distinguished honor to welcome to the podium the man who's brought us here today, His Excellency Professor Compton Bourne, Order of Excellence. And I am convinced that you are one of the most deserving members of the OE, which is the highest order of Guyana. Please welcome Professor Compton Bourne.
I like the Jelly. She is a wonderful person, especially keeping us in line here in a nice way. Dignitaries, colleagues and friends, family, ladies and gentlemen. I begin my remarks by expressing fulsome appreciation to Vice-Chancellor Paloma Mohamed Martin for conceiving of this book launch and engaging her staff, especially Ms. Valentine, in hosting this splendid ceremony. I also want to take this occasion, this opportunity, to commend the Vice-Chancellor on her leadership of the university. Woodrow Wilson, who was president of Princeton University before he became president of the United States of America, remarked that universities were more political than government. This, I think, Vice-Chancellor, you know, is due to the multiplicity of constituencies in a university and in situations of sometimes almost impossible financial constraints. I also want to express appreciation for the presentation by my colleagues and friends across the Caribbean. Mr. Walter Alexander, my friend from my high school days, and a leader in the management and administration of education at several levels for decades in Guyana. Walter is still an important fount of knowledge about education in this country. Carl Greenidge, a colleague and friend from the 1970s in the UG Economics department, when we endured the startup trials of the Turkine campus, but also benefited from the company of an accomplished cadre of academics and administrators. I very much regret that my close friend, Maurice Odell, co-worker in the Vineyard of Economic Development in the Caribbean and various regions of the world, and head of the Department of Economics when I joined in 1969, could not be present here today. Dr. Shelton Nicholls, an outstanding member of my monetary class at UWI St. Augustine, who has ensured through the years that the bonds between me and his cohort remain strong and develop into personal friendships and enduring professional networks. I want also to thank Professor Winston Dookeran, a UWI academic colleague since the 1970s, a distinguished economic scholar in his own right, with whom I've had the benefit of interacting closely during his governorship of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago and his tenure as Minister of Finance. Professor Andrew Downes, who could not be here, whose presentation was read by Ms. Monisha Persaud, President of the UG Economic Society. Welcome to the big league, Ms. Persaud. Professor Downes, who has been my UB colleague since the 1980s, is also a distinguished economic scholar and close family friend for many years. One of my regrets this morning is that Sir Kenneth Hall, the former Governor General of Jamaica and former principal of the UWI Mona campus, a close colleague and friend and erstwhile chronicler of Caribbean integration, unavoidably had to cancel his participation. Now, you, the audience, have heard a lot about this book. So let me use some of the remaining time to tell you what has shaped me, not only as an economist or educator or policy analyst, but as a person. First and foremost, a good mother. The great jazz band leader, Count Basie, used to say, a good drummer is felt, not heard. My mother's influence was subtle and pervasive. A core part of her was her humanism, of which I only became conscious really, during the final weeks of her life, when I saw the extensive range of people of all ages, races, nationalities, religions, who came to pay tribute to her. She was virtually United Nations. But as I reflected, her humanism was always there, in her goodwill and friendship towards her neighbors in Guyana, regardless of race and ethnicity, and most remarkably, her friendship with Amerindians, who in the 1950s were people of derision and, at best, an exploitation by George Tongers. She also exhibited this early appreciation of Amerindian friendship by something that was even more remarkable. She took her firstborn, who sits over there, into the interior to present him to her Amerindian best friend, or bestie. 1942, yeah? Right, brother? Yeah. 1942. The second thing that shaped me is that I've been blessed with a good memory. I worked in it as well. Huh? As somebody remarked, I think it was Andrew Downes, when I, as a poor penniless student in England, working in a brewery called Courage and Barclay, I had this boring job on top of a bottling plant. And if you lost concentration, the bottles came in the wrong way, they crashed in the middle of a noise, the people got injured with caustic soda and so on. So I had to keep alert. And I did so by every day trying to remember, on particular days of course, every book I had read of a French novelist, every calypso I'd heard. And I did that over and over. And I think 6 weeks working in a brewery, working your memory, helped a great deal. Yeah. So Because of that memory, I remember people, their situations, and their circumstances. For a long time, I used to have doubts about my memory, because I remembered some things from when I was about 2 years old, and I said I could not really do that. But the memories are very vivid. Later on in life, I learned by reading science and so on that children do know things from an early age, and they do remember things from the earliest age. The third thing is that I have always liked to stand back or sit back and observe. There are a lot of things one notices when one is not part of the action. For me, observation is usually followed sooner or later by reflection. Why? What is the meaning? What are the actual or likely consequences? What else could have been done? The fourth thing is that from childhood, I was a nationalist. And you'll see that in the book, I guess. It started with the sight of British troops in my neighborhood, Kingston. I lived in Duke Street, Kingston. The sight of the British troops in 1953, marching down Barracks Road on Duke Street, Kingston. It continued with Ghana's independence in 1957 and with the Cuban Revolution in 1959, both of which my study group, of which Walter Alexander was a part, studied very carefully. Nationalist struggles anywhere in the world still get my attention. Fifth, and closely related, is a political consciousness and keen interest in politics going back to 1953, when the British Guyana Self-Government Constitution was overturned. I never became a party political person, but interacted through the years with practicing politicians and government leaders of varying persuasions in many countries across the Caribbean and outside the Caribbean. Sixth, even as a child, I never accepted received wisdom uncritically. That got me into trouble a few times with my father's friends. What was said or asserted had to make sense, theoretically or empirically. I carried that characteristic into my study and practice of economics. I would describe myself as one immersed in economic theory, but grounded in empiricism. And this perhaps explains the amount of fieldwork I have done, either within financial and government institutions or among farms and farm households in the Caribbean and the Eastern and Southern Africa. Now, if I were to be asked what the main drivers of my work as a practicing economist are, I would say the elimination of poverty, the reduction of human vulnerability, and substantial reduction in inequality of incomes and access to essential material and social services. I think these preoccupations, if they can be termed that, are evident in my writings and in my engagements with myriad governments, government agencies, regional and international organizations and institutions for the greater part of my professional life. They lead naturally into my work on economic growth and economic development. But what would not be seen from what is written or observed in those writings is the influence of creative writing on my appreciation of the imperative of improving the human condition. Fiction, whether Caribbean, Latin American, Middle Eastern, Asian, African, American, or European, provides me with observations, insights, and cause for reflection, and a call for action, which economic and social livelihood statistics cannot fully provide. And I say this particularly for the benefit of young economists and young social scientists in this room. You can't understand the human condition so well without looking at fiction, literature, other things, other than the statistics. Through literature, I understood the importance of myths in human lives. And if you want to know something about myths in Guyana life, in early Guyana life, read and myths and belief systems and obia. Read Roy Heath's early work, Kwaku, which talks at some stage late in the novel about obia in Stanley Tongue. I never learned about that from my friend John Dow here. He never told me about obia in Stanley Tongue. He's a New Amsterdam man. Read Stephanie Bowie's Lilowati. Read Stephanie Bowie's True Stories, and you learn about myths and belief systems across Guyana, particularly in our formative years. You don't get that from the academic big books. You get it from your creative writers. But it was not all creative writing that informed me. James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time, was of tremendous influence on a teenage Compton Bourne. That inspired me and got me into the whole arena of looking at the Afro-American experience. And I followed it through the years, and I still follow it. But there's also the music and painting, those, and sports, those expressions of the human spirit, human conditions and aspirations that I read. In the company of a very dear friend in the US, Paul Bourne, a little more than a year ago, I saw Terence Blanchard is a famous jazz musician, trumpeter. Terence Blanchard's musical on the life of the great welterweight boxing champion, Emile Griffith. I think Griffith was from the Virgin Islands. I had seen Griffith's fight with a man called Benny Parrott in 1962. Parrott died as a result of that fight. It was the most sustained, set of punches ever seen in a boxing match. Parrott died after. I saw Griffith's later fights and noted the loss of his ferocity, but didn't understand it. It's when I saw Terence Blanchard's musical called Champion on the life of Emile Griffith. Then I comprehended the lifelong emotional struggle or trauma that Griffith endured subsequent to that fight. Again, I stress, it's the arts that help you a lot. It's the sports, that helps one to understand a lot of things. At least that helped me. Now, a last anecdote, and this time about music. Some years ago, I gave a talk to some fifth-form schoolgirls in Trinidad about inequality and inequality of education opportunity. And I digressed into inequality and bias in charitable donations. And I decided to illustrate the point about inequality in charity by making reference to a song by Snoop Dogg. How many of you ever heard about Snoop Dogg? Snoop Dogg, who earlier was called Snoop Doggy Dogg. Yeah. Now, Snoop Dogg had this song asking why Santa Claus didn't go to the ghetto. Right? A song about bias, inequality in the operations of charitable organizations, right? Or entities. Now, you can imagine my reference to Snoop Dogg got the girls' attention. And they probably were saying to themselves, this old guy listening to rap. So, music, arts, sports, generally, very important. Now, as you would have discerned, I've spent many years in higher education, both the planning, the teaching, planning, management. My central concern there has been how to make universities more central and effective in their roles as agent of social and economic development, and, very importantly, social cohesion. Another concern, how to make higher education more accessible to students from less advantaged economic circumstances. Now, integral to that concern are the quality and sufficiency of the institution's academic and supporting staff, the quality and adequacy of their physical and information infrastructure, the efficiency of their operations and their financial stability, and the adequacy of loans and other forms of financial assistance to needy students. These are all central concerns. They persist. We have to grapple with them. Societies have to grapple with them all the time, adjust how they respond to the various issues and to the change in knowledge needs and the change in technology of knowledge. So those are the currents, and those are things that have influenced me over the years. I don't think I'm done yet. In fact, I'm in the middle of writing a book on the Guyana's economy after oil, with the advent of oil. Halfway through it, I've been distracted by being asked to do other things, including being in Brasilia, but I'm working on it. So, Jelly, let me conclude by expressing gratitude to the many people who attended this book launch here and virtually. I'm truly thankful for the interest shown in it. I hope many people read the book, read snippets of it. It took me a little while to do. People ask me, they say, did you keep notes on all these things? All these names, if you remember. No, not really. I had some documents, but basically, the memory worked. And I hope it. My mother at 96 could recall lots of things. I hope that if I am around that long, I can as well. Thank you very much.
I'd just like to invite our students to present a gift on behalf of the University of Guyana to Professor. Professor, thank you so much for allowing the university to launch this book. We're grateful, and we want to present you with something just as a token of our thank you and appreciation. Thank you, Professor. And now we're going to go into our Q&A, but we'll do Q&A with brunch. So we'll go right into brunch and Q&A. And right after that, I think we can all start to go as we wish. I want to say on behalf of the university. Yes? Librarian is here. Thank you, Professor Bourne. I'm sure that for sure, if you let me keep this copy, I'll buy it. I'll read it. Actually, let me read this part that made me crack up this morning. I am like, this is, like, you know that you're gonna do great things from small, and hopefully your parents don't clip your wings, and they nurture that. And you're able to, at some point by yourself, when as we say, catch sense, you're able to groom that and become the leader that you're meant to be. So here's this part, which you think is really crazy and wild, and I probably have done similar things, and that's why I laughed so much. The paragraph starts with, I was somewhat enterprising. I'm going to skip a few lines. He goes to one enterprise which did not pan out, was my capture of a couple of baby alligators, which, unknown to my mother, I planned to keep in her wash tub until I found buyers. Confronted by their snapping presence a few days later, she was far from thrilled and insisted I get rid of them, which I did by returning them to their natural habitat. You are daring but logical, because I didn't hear you say you protest. So you're a man of logic. Professor, thank you. And the youth would say mic drop. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Excellency Professor Compton Bourne, for your work. The book, I'm surely going to read it once I get myself a copy. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for putting aside time on your Sunday to be here. Thank you, Vice-Chancellor, for conceiving this. Everyone online, thank you for staying with us. You have a great rest of the day and get home safely. And we'll have copies of the book at the bookstore at some point, Professor said. Yes, and thank you so much to our UG team who worked all week and the weeks before heading up to graduation. Oh no, I tell you, the grind is different. Thank you so much to our team. We appreciate all of your hard work. Thank you. Yulaski's there, exhausted. Tara has headed out. Christoph, thank you. Miss Hunter and everybody who worked all week and then we got up this morning to say, you know what, I am going to trek out and I'll come. All right, thank you. And our students, yes.